Imagine starting your day with clarity, ending it with reflection, and feeling fully present in between. This is the kind of intentional living we're moving toward, together. Welcome to the Mindful Edit podcast, where we explore self-reflective questions, mindful habits, and small daily shifts to help you live with purpose, intention, and connection. I'm your host, Annette Furrio, founder of Season Journals, and I'm glad you're here. Hello, and welcome to the Mindful Edit podcast, where we talk about living with intention, practicing mindful habits, and experiencing well-being through journaling and self-reflection. I'm your host, Annette Furrio, founder of Season Journals. Today, I am grateful to be joined by Jodi of Kovacs Counseling, an independently licensed marriage and family therapist who works with adolescents, couples, and families navigating high-stress life challenges. Jodi believes we all have the capacity to grow into better versions of ourselves. She emphasizes building a strong therapeutic relationship with her clients while honoring each individual's ability to create meaningful change. She brings extensive experience supporting teens in crisis from her time at Nationwide Children's Hospital. She understands how overwhelming the teen and preteen years can be for both adolescents and their parents, and helps teens better understand and manage their emotions while strengthening communication within the family. She also works with couples who feel stuck in repetitive conflict cycles, helping partners identify new, positive interaction patterns, leading to a more fulfilling relationship. Her experience includes work at the Ohio State University Couple and Family Therapy Clinic. She has significant experience diagnosing and treating both adult and adolescent ADHD, working to improve overall functioning and quality of life. Jodi, welcome to the Mindful Edit.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Today, Jodi and I are talking about something that we are both passionate about, and that is how to stay connected to our partners, our families, and our communities in the digital age, and how to do it with intention. So, Jodi, just start us off with a broad definition of what connecting with intention means to you.
So I find myself often commenting about the concept of being present with somebody when you're trying to intentionally connect with them, because being present is so challenging today, right? We have so many things around us and usually our phones on us, right, that are constantly trying to take our attention. And so I think training ourselves or retraining ourselves on how to be present with another person and limiting distractions as much as possible is really, really valuable. And when it comes to wanting to be intentional about connecting with a partner, I think it's important that both people are trying to set the intention, right? Because if only one person is trying to be intentional and the other person is maybe, you know, not as not trying, not as passionate about it, not aware, whatever. I think it takes both, right?
Exactly.
Parties being engaged and interested in that to make it work. I also think that I know this sounds probably pretty self-explanatory, but eye contact is super important, right? And I think that that is a little bit of a lost art, making eye contact with the people that we're talking to. But a very powerful one because it's more rare. You know what I mean? Our eyes can be focused on a TV, on a phone, on any other number of things, and not on the person we're trying to connect with. So I think eye contact is super important as well.
Eye contact, having both partners invested or people invested, knowing that they're here to be intentional, having an intentional conversation. Any other common things you tell your clients to do when they're trying to connect on an intentional level, whether that is a couple or a family, or is it the same tactics?
I really think it's the same tactics, but I really think that it is, and this is why therapy can be so useful, because we're all talking about trying to accomplish the same thing, right? It's setting the intention to be intentional. You know what I mean? It's like agreeing like this is important to us, right? And so I think it falls down when it may be important to one person, but maybe not important to another. And then you need to kind of dig in and understand like what are the reasons behind that, right? So there's a lot of different reasons why connection fails.
Mm,
And you have to start with both parties being invested and involved in wanting that connection to be successful. Otherwise, you can dole out any number of possible solutions or fixes or interventions, and they might fall flat if you really don't have the buy-in up front that this is something important and that's something that all parties want.
sure. Talk a little bit more about those barriers to entry, some of the hurdles to connecting with intention. Is it time? Is it busyness? Is the devices that you mentioned, avoiding it altogether?
I think it's actually all of those.
Hmm.
I love all the things that you mentioned, and I think it's absolutely all of those. I think that when couples think about how they spend their time, we're typically able to make time for things that we want to prioritize. You know what I mean? So a lot of people will say like, "Oh, I'm just so busy," or "I'm just so busy," right? Um, but when it comes down to it, if we really want to prioritize something, we will. And a lot of times, I hear couples and families say they're just so busy with work
Mhm.
or their kids' activities, right? Which those both are very easy things to prioritize typically for families. But in reality, a lot of times it's not that partners, and I'm going to speak specifically maybe about couples right now, it's not that couples don't want to be intentional about connecting with each other. It's that they might not feel comfortable with it, or they might not have the skills and know how to engage at that deeper, more vulnerable level. And so instead of saying, gosh, I'm really feeling uncomfortable by doing this, or I don't know that I know how, right? They'll just say, well, we're just so busy. You know what I mean?
Mm,
You kind of dig down a little deeper. Perhaps maybe they at one point were able to connect at a deeper level, but then relational hurt started piling up in the marriage. And then it became really hard to get past those. Or in some cases, one or more partners really never had the skills in the first place. And so those quickly became exposed over the course of the marriage. And then it started to feel not as good for the
sure.
couple. So it's not always, sometimes it's a function of time, sometimes, and sometimes it's a function of distractions. And we can absolutely work on those. But sometimes it's a function of people just may not know how.
Right. Having the language or having the questions to ask or knowing how to get the conversation started. Do
Mhm.
you do
Yeah.
you give help with or ideas for how to start that conversation, like how to ease into it, especially when you might be dealing with problems and challenges that are hard to talk about?
Sure. A lot of times it starts with me collecting a lot of information about a person's family of origin. And as a marriage and family therapist, I'm, trained to treat the system and under things at the system level, which our system is, primarily like our primary family system and primary family unit, but then that extends out to our family of origin and our partner's family of origin and can kind of go back generations. And so, in collecting information on that, people often, not always, but often will realize if they are struggling in communicating well about their emotions or being vulnerable with their partners, they realize, gosh, I don't know that mom or dad or, my role models growing up really did that well either. And so, connecting on a deeper level feels uncomfortable for them because
Mhm.
they're not used to it. And connecting at a more superficial level, right, may feel more like their norm. And
Sure.
so I talk a lot with couples about what we tend to normalize and accept to be true for us, right? So the way we grow up is the way we grow up. It's what we're used to. It's what we're comfortable with. I joke and say that, people will sometimes leave the home when they launch, become an adult and look around and say, oh gosh, people don't put ketchup on their Cheerios. Well, that's weird. Why is everyone using milk? Just to kind of say, like, whatever we grow up with, even if it maybe isn't more normative, right? It's our norm
Mhm.
until we learn otherwise and learn to question, right? And so I am often working with couples on being curious about the norms that they came from and asking whether or not they want to accept those into their adult life or whether they want to challenge them or do anything different.
Hmm, that's so interesting. And like we hear, it's years of conditioning or understand thinking that that is your normal, and to make change has to be difficult, and time consuming, and takes time to get there, I'm sure. We are living in this time when multitasking is normalized. You mentioned distractions are everywhere. We have our phones in our hands. How do you help couples and families specifically manage the attachment to their phone? This is something that I think all of us are dealing with in whatever home structure we have. What strategies have you found to work?
I could talk about this topic for for a while, but just because it's one that I'm very interested in. I'm very interested in, how technology and specifically our phones are kind of gobbling up our attention. I think when it comes to partners struggling to connect, I think that the phone is undoubtedly a major source of distraction. But before I kind of dive into that with couples or families, I like to understand, is there actually more avoidance happening rather than just like the phone being the problem, right? Because sometimes the phone is the problem, but sometimes it's just a symptom of the problem, right? If people
Okay.
are always on phones, is it because they're truly addicted to their phones? I mean, maybe, and in some cases, yes, but is that all that's going on, or is that just a major source of distraction to avoid something that feels uncomfortable for them? And
Hmm.
so I think it's really important to figure out if there's any levels of avoidance, because if you're only addressing the phone piece, you're not really addressing the avoidance piece. And they can get rid of the phone, but then they'll just substitute the phone with something else.
Okay.
But it's helpful to understand, is there avoidance going on? That being said, right, the phone does present so many challenges for individuals, couples, families, like runs the gamut. Um, I think if a couple, I guess since we're talking about couples and connection, if we want to support a couple in kind of setting boundaries with their phone, there's a variety of things that I suggest. So, one, a lot of times I'm treating couples that also have families, either young families, older kids, whatever. And I encourage them to make it a family level initiative, to just say, look, like, mom and dad are, recognizing that we'd like to have a better relationship with our phones. And, we all want to be a part of this, or we want everyone to be a part of this, right? So that does multiple things. So, one, it's when you talk about having a relationship with your phone, you're not saying the phone is bad. You're just saying, hey, I want to look at my relationship with it, see what I like about it, see what I don't like about it, right? Because especially when some people are very, very attached to their phones. And if you tell them their phone is bad, right, they're going to instantly put up a wall and they're not going to want to talk about any sort of relationship with it, right? So talking
Hmm.
about the relationship with a phone opens the door to hopefully a more robust conversation. And then two, whether you have little kids or kids that already have phones, right? I mean, technology is a part of our life, right? And so we have to learn to work with it and learn how to manage it rather than, work against it. So that's why I think the family level initiative is a really cool thing. I am a huge proponent of not having phones at meal times, right? And keeping meal times sacred for
Hmm.
couples, even without kids, right? Let's just spend time like in the direction of each other, right? Like TV off, like phones somewhere else, right? I think if you have the phone next to you, you're much more likely to grab it, hear it. Think having it
Yes.
out of sight, out of mind, and also turning like the ringer off, just kind of protecting that space because I mean, it's like Pavlov's dog. Like we are going to have a response, an emotional response that is going to take us away from our conversation if we hear our phone ding.
Hmm.
So I think limiting in terms of what we can see and what we can hear is helpful. And then also for adults that work, right? Setting boundaries with work, right? A lot of times people will come home from work, or even if they work at home. I mean, that's especially challenging for people that work from home, but you can come home from work and work can follow you. You know what I mean? People aren't aware of how their personal life is being polluted by their work life. And the phone is a great entry point for that, right? And so I
Right.
think having the conversation around how to have healthy boundaries with work to protect what you want things to look like when you're home. I think physical boundaries are always helpful. So I think it's a good thing to be conscientious of, do I have my phone constantly on me? Is it constantly in front of me? Like, is it everywhere that I'm going? Or does it have a home? When I get home, can I put my phone in its own little home? You know what I mean? Have like a little place for
Yes.
it. This phone goes when I want to engage in family life, right? And sometimes for some people's professions, it's just not possible to do that. And
Sure.
that's where you can get into finding ways to kind of set those boundaries on the actual phone itself. So even though the phone might be with you, the phone's only going to deliver notifications and communications to you in the way that you set it. And there's like, you know, a million different ways to do that today
Sure.
on phone. Um, I think the last thing I will say is I think it can be useful to investigate, right? And this is very much at an individual level, looking at your phone's usage and see where am I actually spending my time, right? Because we may
Mm-hmm.
think we're spending time in one place and we may actually been spending time in another place. And so when you look at like where the bulk of your phone usage is going, I think a couple things can be helpful. One, to say, do I like where my attention is going? Do I like the fact that this chunk of my days is going to this specific place? And if you don't like it, I think it can be helpful to say, one, like, what is this a function of? Is there something that I might be avoiding, right? That I'm instead using this app or this particular venue
Mm-hmm.
to distract me from that. Number two, what is it that I'm getting out of this particular, app that I keep going to? What might I be seeking in those moments? And is this the best place for me to get it? And then three, do I think that I can manage reducing this on my own? Or do I need to take a more like aggressive strategy, such as there's all sorts of things you can do. You can delete the apps, you can make them
Mm-hmm.
harder to access, you can turn your phone to grayscale, you can set boundaries around when you access that app, right? So you can really kind of fine tune whatever it is you're looking to manage.
Wow, those are some really excellent tools and ideas that are so able to implement, but maybe with some challenge, right? You might set that timer on your app and, you hit the, ignore for today. I know I've done that. But really understanding the reason why I love that. What am I getting from this app? What is the result that I'm looking for out of this specific action? Understanding that and saying, can I get that from somewhere else or maybe not? And this is the time I'm going to spend, feeling joy looking at those videos or, oh, actually, I don't get joy looking from any of those videos. It doesn't make sense to do that. And I love also what you said about the sensory. You can see it and you can hear it. So physically taking it away so you cannot see or hear. And then your senses are now going to, oh, what am I eating? What are we talking about? Looking, making the eye contact. So it all works together. I think that's going to be really, really great to put some of those into use.
I think it's also for individuals being willing to, number one, question their usage. Like it's become such
Mm-hmm.
a societal norm having our phones with us and how we use them, right? But being willing to ask the question of like, do I like how I'm using my phone? Right. And
Sure.
then if I don't like how I'm using my phone, I'm being willing to kind of self-monitor on a regular basis because sometimes again, we think we're doing one thing and in all actuality we're doing another. And so I think if somebody did want to start this process of evaluating their relationship with their phone, I think it's just setting aside time on a semi-regular basis is just check in with, okay, I've tried these different tactics or I've tried these different interventions. Like, are they working? Are they accomplishing what I wanted them to? So maybe on like a weekly or bi-weekly basis, just checking in to see like, am I making a difference?
Progress, understanding
Mhm.
where you're coming from and where you're going, reflection, very important. I also like the idea of bringing someone along on the journey. I know it can feel a little hard to do it on your own, perhaps. So if it's like a friend, if maybe you're a teenager, you and your friend do it together, or your family, like you mentioned, the family coming to that decision together, or a couple coming to that decision together, I'm sure you see a little bit more success if there can be a partnership or some accountability.
For sure. For sure. And I think at the family level, you know what I mean? If you really want to try to do this, you can ask your family members, hey, I'm really trying to have a different relationship with my phone. Like, help me. You know what I mean? If I miss something, if you catch me and I'm not aware of it, like please let me know. Right.
Mhm.
And when parents can say that, when parents can say that, and model that behavior for their kids, I mean, that is so priceless, right? Because those are the
Mm,
same types of things we're going to be monitoring our kids. We're going to be wanting to give them feedback. But if you model having your teen give you feedback, like that's a super powerful thing because it
wow.
shows respect, right? The same respect that you want from them at
Mm-hmm.
some, you know?
Mm, that's wonderful. So, I want to talk a little bit about loneliness. So, we're both passionate about human connection, intentional conversations. In 2023, the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, published a paper that brought to the attention the negative effects of loneliness, going so far as to declare it as an epidemic. How can we prioritize human connection when phones, social media, everything we just talked about makes it so easy to stay within the confines of our own homes? And how do we get past that friction of maybe it's a little uncomfortable, but going out and doing something in the world or with real human connection?
So I love that you brought this into the podcast because I specifically remember reading that report when it came out and thinking like, oh my gosh, yes, like this is a problem, right? And the Surgeon General is talking about it. So, it's giving a lot more weight to what we're seeing clinically, maybe on a small
Mm,
basis, but I think that it's happening, on a national level.
hmm.
Um, I'm just going to speak initially from the standpoint of what I often see happening with couples in my practice setting, but I know that research supports this also on a larger scale. It's not uncommon for males to be disproportionately affected by loneliness, and it's not uncommon to see it around midlife for males.
Mm,
And then how that kind of translates over into the couple or the marriage. So, a lot of times, so I'm kind of speaking to kind of a specific population here, and then I can generalize from there. But a lot of times, men that are affected are very high achieving, driven type A's that have been climbing some sort of professional ladder for many years and
hmm.
partnered and in relationships. But at some
Okay.
point, they reach typically around midlife, this point where they've climbed almost to the top of their ladder, right? So the gains that they get from the incremental climbs, right, maybe don't feel as fulfilling as they once did. Or maybe they are at
Okay.
the top and they're like, okay, what now? Right. And
Hmm.
so, where they used to maybe get a lot of dopamine from their professional satisfaction and their professional lives, maybe now they get less of it there. And so, they may be left with okay, like what now? And they look around and maybe they have left a lot of their emotional lives not well tended to. And what this can look like in the marriage is a lot of times the female partner, if it's a heterosexual couple, the female partner will have done a lot of the emotional heavy lifting in the relationship and in the family. So the male may have a less developed set of emotional skills and tools, and then they don't really right? Have those skills and tools to like manage their loneliness because maybe their spouse has done that often for them. And so to be able to reach out and connect with friends outside of the marriage and develop
Hmm.
things beyond the superficial level may be a skill set that person doesn't necessarily have. I know I'm speaking very gendered here. It can obviously be the reverse, but we just see it more often with
Sure.
males.
Do you find that females have more groups of friends that they have fostered over the years?
Yeah, I mean, typically females are socialized to be
Mhm.
communicators, to be engaging at somewhat of a deeper level, right? Where men are typically socialized differently. They may not be expected to communicate at the same level. They've got a lot of dudes, they've got a lot of buddies, right? And so they may
Mhm.
get together and they may spend time together, right? But it may lack that emotional depth
Okay.
that really useful for a male because life gets hard. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
life gets complicated. And there's a lot of issues that men face, and it can feel very lonely if the only person they've ever relied upon, right, was their spouse. And then
Right.
what can happen there is the marriage can start to feel imbalanced because
Mm.
at some point, the weight of that kind of unbalancing of one person carrying the emotional weight for the whole marriage can then lead to
Mhm.
really satisfaction. So then there's that piled on top as well. So it can be a rough situation for males in that position. So that's kind of looking at loneliness through the gendered perspective. But I think I mean, and now I'm not speaking from research because I mean, we're still understanding how all of this technology is impacting us on a kind of a global level, like,
Hmm.
present day. But I think it is harder to connect with people meaningfully and intentionally because we have so many things that want to get in the way.
And I
Um,
want to call out how you said it's not just about getting together, it's about the quality of that time together. So men may get together, but maybe they didn't talk about anything that was actually troubling them, or it's more of a social gathering instead of something more meaningful. So not just the act or the look that you're getting together, oh, I have things on my calendar, oh, I see people all the time, but is it actually, are you making meaningful connection, having meaningful conversation, going deeper?
yeah. And it's not necessarily that they're doing anything wrong, right? And
Mhm.
they just may not realize that there could be more. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
sometimes they
Mhm.
don't, because they've never been exposed to it, or they've never modeled it. They've never had it
Mhm.
modeled for them, right?
Sure.
But like kind of making that shift over into developing their emotional and mental, toolbox, if you will, their intimacy toolbox, right?
Mhm.
It's a different skill set, and it's a shift for them. And that's really like a great buffer though for loneliness, right? Is to have more skills in that area.
How do you start? How do you break that barrier for maybe someone like me who's an introvert, or someone who's maybe moved to a new city, doesn't have a big social connection, or focused on their career or their family for a number of years? How do they get back out there to start making some of these connections in adulthood?
So, for this topic, and with a lot of things that feel scary to us, right? You just have to start small. Like when we think
Mhm.
about the grandiosity of this big, hairy thing that we want to tackle and we want to change that we're unhappy with, right? It can feel very, very overwhelming. I know this is kind of like a random, a random analogy, but I often use it with people to say, well, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat an
Uh-huh.
elephant one bite. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
like one small time. So helping people realize it can look very, very like very, very small acts of exposure in the beginning.
Okay.
So you just want to expose yourself to things that scare you or things that feel
Mhm.
intimidating, feel uncomfortable in really small doses. So it might mean, just practicing smiling at somebody or saying hi to somebody at work that you haven't normally said hi to,
Mm.
or just making eye contact with somebody on the street as you're walking past. Or it can be saying, okay, I'm going to show up to this work event, but I'm only going to stay for 20 minutes. You know what I mean? I'm not going to stay for the full 2.5 hours. I'm just going to stay for
Mhm.
20 minutes and then leave. You know what I mean? So giving yourself little bite sized chunks of exposure. And then not just doing that, but then you have to check in with yourself afterwards and say, okay, like, how did that make me feel? Like, what was the worst thing that could have happened? What is the best thing that can come out of this? What is it that I'm actually scared of? Because a lot of times it's our irrational thoughts that get the best of us. And
Mhm.
so we have to work to engage the cognitive part of our brain rather than the emotional part of our brain to kind of
Mhm.
challenge those irrational thoughts.
And I think journaling could probably be a good tool after some of these times to come back and write what's going on. And it's that reflection of, how did I feel? How did this go? What can I do differently next time? How can I stretch myself next time? And having some of that perspective through writing or through talking.
I love journaling in that way because I'm a big fan of, and I often talk with my clients about having feedback loops,
Mm.
that whether something goes well or not is irrelevant. You just have to be paying attention to the feedback because it's all feedback, right? Like you just need to take that feedback and what can we learn from it? So
Mm.
if I'm working with a couple and I'm encouraging them to try something different and they come back the next time and, they had like, three big conflicts since I last saw them. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it. That's feedback. That's feedback that something's
Mhm.
happening in your system. Like, let's figure it out, right? So, not to be scared of things going poorly. I think
Mm.
sometimes people fear, what if it doesn't go well? Well, what if I get, scared, or what if it feels uncomfortable? I'm like, well, that's okay. That's just feedback. That's just giving your system feedback that, your body's trying to tell you something. Let's figure it out. So I think
Yes.
encouraging and normalizing feedback is helpful.
Feedback, I think that's so important. And like we say with everything, like the data, we have the data. We want to know all this data about ourselves. And so it's like that is our own personal feedback that we are receiving. So listen to it, listen to ourselves and recognize. Don't
Yeah.
just let it go on. And I'm sure that's how you help by seeing people week after week. You can call out the patterns and you can help them see patterns as well. If you
Yes.
could give our listeners just one thing to try this week, maybe an action item that could improve relationship connectedness to others, what is one thing you might suggest?
Um, so I'm going to come at this from the perspective of a couple, although I'm sure it's transferable to other things. But I think that just if you are one that is listening to this podcast and you're thinking that connection is hard for you, but it's something that you want to try, I think it's an awesome first step to just tell your partner that it's hard for you. Being willing to just say that being vulnerable and connecting is hard, but I want to try and figure this out.
Mm,
There is so much intimacy in just that one comment because being willing to dip your toe in the pool and saying this is hard is amazing. And it breeds a lot of empathy from the partner, from the other person, right? To recognize, oh, wow, I just thought you didn't care, right? Because a lot
mm,
of times, like when you're not engaging at a more intimate level around your emotions, the other person could just feel like, well, they don't care, right? Like that's how
mhm,
it across. And so to reframe that for the partner, it's not that they don't care, it's that it's hard for them. Well, then all of a
mhm,
sudden there's a ton of empathy in the relationship. So
mhm.
I think that is a really phenomenal first step to take.
Yes, that's a great starting point that can open the door that says, I'm being vulnerable here. I hope some people try that this week. And if anyone wants to continue exploring this topic, do you have any books or blogs or resources you like to send with your clients that you can pass along to us?
Yeah, so a couple things come to mind. But this is what I tell my clients when they're looking for perhaps like a therapist for a child of theirs, or if they're in couples therapy and they want to look for an individual therapist. I'm often telling them, you have to find the right fit for you. You have to
Hmm.
find the person you feel most connected with. And I think that's very transferable when thinking about podcasts, right? You have to find the podcast that speaks to you.
Right.
There's a lot of really good content out there, and so if there's a topic that you're interested in, I just suggest that you like find all the people that are talking about that topic and then do a brief listen of 5 or 10 minutes of what the vibe is for that podcast, and just go with whatever works for you. Right.
Hmm.
Because like I said, there's no one size fits all in this kind of space. So outside of that, there are a couple people that I really appreciate recommending. One is I love all the work by Brené Brown, and she does a lot of work on vulnerability and shame and connection. And she often works with a lot of like high achieving, very driven people.
Hmm.
So I just think she's easy to listen to. She's fun. She's very smart. She's done a lot of research in these areas. So any way you can connect with Brené Brown would be great. I also have an amazing resource. It is one of these books that I have read from cover to cover that I love, and it's called Strong. It's a relationship field guide for the modern man. And I think this is a phenomenal resource for the topics that we talked about earlier for men that are really wanting to develop those parts of themselves, but maybe struggling to figure out what skills they need to build. Super, super helpful. I also love, and this is more coming at things from a parenting perspective, but I really love the work of Lisa Damour and her podcast, Ask Dr. Lisa, just because she does a really great job of being grounded in research, but delivering very approachable kind of problem solving skills to help with staying connected as a family, staying connected with our kids
Hmm.
um, in a very challenging time of life. So those
Hmm.
are my recommendations for now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We will put links to those resources in the show notes. Jodi, thank you so much for joining us today. I learned so much, and I know the audience did as well. I'm excited to start implementing some of these things in my own relationships. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Annette. It was my pleasure.
Before we go, Jodi left us with 2 journal prompts for you to write and reflect on. Feel free to do these now or come back and revisit this episode when you have time. Number 1, describe a time when you felt very connected to another person. What was it that made you feel connected? Number 2, what do you notice about yourself when you are truly present with another person? How does the quality of your interaction change when you are present versus when you're multitasking? Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Mindful Edit podcast. I hope you learned something that you can take into your relationships this week so that you can live and connect with more intention. Be well.